Man, I love to smoke. I quit a number of years ago, but I've never stopped missing that feeling of filling my lungs full of that tasty particulate and then expelling it into the air in a beautiful cloud. This coming February, in fact, will mark 20 years since I smoked my last cigarettes. But I have always found it awkward to use the word anniversary when talking about my quitting. You see, I started smoking at an early age, in my mother's womb. She smoked for the both of us. And shortly after I was born, I quit for a little while. But I picked it up again in high school. I don't know if I was succumbing to peer pressure or if I was the peer pressure, but suddenly everybody was smoking. My brand was Marlboro Lights, and my friends and I delighted in running around behind our parents' backs, smoking cigarettes, and reveling in the immortality of youth. And I would say as far as habits go, things didn't really, run away from me until I got to college. I'd say a defining moment for me was filling out my roommate preference survey. I knew my mother would see it, so I didn't want her to know that I smoked, and I checked that I was a non-smoker. But secretly hoping to be paired with a smoker so I could smoke in my room, I wrote no preference next to my roommate's smoking habits. As I thought she might, my mother saw it and she said, "Oh, no, Dave, you have to write non-smoker preferred, or else they'll pair you with a smoker and all of your things will smell like smoke." That's what she picked on? And it's not something that I ever thought about before, my things smelling like smoke, but she was pretty adamant, and so, I don't know, maybe she was onto something, and I conceded, non-smoker preferred. Meanwhile, in the little town of Reston, Virginia, a young man by the name of Alec McRoy was filling out his roommate preference survey. And because he didn't want his parents to know that he smoked, he checked non-smoker. But secretly hoping to be paired with a smoker, he wrote no preference next to his roommate's smoking habits. His mother saw this and, cut from the same cloth as mine, insisted that he switch it to non-smoker preferred, and so he did. 6 months later, I would meet Alec for the first time when we moved into our dorm room together and became roommates. And it probably took less than 24 hours for us to discover our common roommate preference survey story. And so these two college freshmen, non-smokers on paper, became avid smokers overnight. And I don't mean that I just started smoking a lot. I started smoking brazenly. Like, if you knew me at the time, you'd seen me more than once take a huge drag on a cigarette and expel it up to the sky, proclaiming, "Who wants to live forever?" That was me all through college and graduate school, and even into my first job, which I got when I moved here to Cincinnati in 1992. I gained employment at a Superfund cleanup site you may have heard of called Fernald. As if smoking wasn't a risky enough habit, now I would be doing it. Surrounded by radioactive material. I didn't actually handle the radioactive material, but I was close enough, I guess, to earn a free annual medical checkup from the on-site medical staff. And one year they introduced this test called the spirometer. It measures your lung capacity. You blow into a tube and you have to blow out as many of these digital candles on the monitor as you can. Today, if you were to take this test, you would get results in the form of percentages. Back then, it was a little more insensitive. My results said, "You have the lungs of a 70-year-old. Yeah, that is not something I would like to hear today. I was not even 30 at the time. I mean, some people don't make it to 70. And it was with more than a little bit of dread that I went in to meet with the doctor to go over the results of all of my tests. And he looked them over and said, cholesterol okay, blood pressure okay. David, you're basically okay. And I was like, what about those 70-year-old lungs? And he looked it over and says here you had asthma as a kid? I had had a couple of asthma attacks. Well, it could be that. How much do you smoke a day? Half a pack. Pah! And he signed off that he'd met with me and even added 2 words of encouragement at no extra charge. Continue lifestyle. And I should have been elated, right? I mean, my doctor just gave me a license to smoke. But those words, 70-year-old lungs, hung with me. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to quit. Now, there's a big gap, between wanting and doing. So I started looking for a sign, something to draw a line in the sand and say, you want to quit? Well, today's the day. And I finally got that sign when my grandfather died. My mother's father, the first of my grandparents to go. He didn't die from any smoking-related reasons, but I was looking for a sign, and so I grabbed onto it. I said, I will quit in honor of my grandfather's memory. And it worked. Cold turkey for 2 years. Till I was at a party at my friend Buzz Davis's house. Some of you know him. Buzz is notorious for having lots of people at his parties, and I knew a ton of people at this party, many of whom were on the porch smoking where I could see them. And I was just watching in envy at them smoking and exhaling and having a good time, and I wanted to be out there with them. And I thought to myself, if I want a cigarette that bad, why should I deny myself? And then I thought, yeah, but if I smoke again, aren't I dishonoring the memory of my grandfather? And then I thought, yeah, but didn't I just make that up? Wasn't that just a gimmick that I used to fool myself into not smoking anymore? And then I thought, yeah. Sorry, Gramps, and I went out on the porch and bummed a cigarette. And then I bummed another one. And pretty soon I was the Marlboro Lights man all over again. Those words, 70-year-old lungs, fading from memory like the sting of a speeding ticket after you've driven slowly for a couple of days, but then begin to drive brazenly again. Now, I know smoking is bad for you. I know all the reasons why one should quit. And so I consider myself lucky that another reason to quit finally came into my life that made me want to stop. He was born on October 31st, 1999. His mother and I named him Tyson. And I could remember holding him in my arms, in the first few months of his life, admiring his perfect skin, unblemished, listening to him cry with those strong little pink lungs and smelling that new baby smell on him. And I thought, yeah, I want to quit again. And yes, for all the reasons you might imagine, I wanted to live long enough to see him grow old, blah, blah, blah. But there was a bigger reason that was urging me on. Because as I was holding him in my arms, I was imagining that he was beginning to create this unconscious association between his daddy and the smell of smoke. And I don't know why that bothered me so much. Maybe it had something to do with the bug my mother put in my ear before I went off to college. But it really stuck with me, and I knew I wanted to quit. Of course, there's a big gap between wanting and doing. So I began to look for another sign, something to draw the line in the sand that said, you want to quit? Well, today's the day. And just 3 months after Tyson was born, at the end of February in the year 2000, I got my sign. A friend of mine at work, DQ Benedict, was going out to pick up takeout Chinese food for lunch. You want some, Dave? I love takeout Chinese, sure. I don't remember what I ate, but I do remember it came with a fortune cookie. And the fortune inside that cookie said, "Today may be your lucky day." As far as signs go, it was a little flimsy. But I was looking for one, so I grabbed it. I decided today may be my lucky day because it's the day I quit smoking. And I decided it would be. I just had to do one more thing. I don't know if anybody here has ever smoked, quit, tried to quit, but you may be familiar with something called the quitter's paradox. Once you decide to quit, if you have any cigarettes left in your pack, do you throw them out or do you finish them? I couldn't throw mine out. But I also knew that if I finished them too early in the day, I would buy another pack to get me through the day, which I likely wouldn't finish, so I'd have cigarettes the next day, which I couldn't throw out, so I'd have to smoke those. It's like having 8 hot dogs, but only 6 hot dog buns. You gotta buy more hot dog buns to finish the hot dogs, but then you need more hot dogs to finish the hot dog buns. It's a never-ending sequence of nitrates. So I decided what I needed to do in order to quit that day was to ration my cigarettes to the end of the day. I didn't smoke at home anymore, but I did have a class after work that day. It was a Tuesday, I remember, and I was taking this once-a-week class that actually met on the grounds where I worked. There were like 20 or 30 of us in it, and because it was only once a week, it was like a 2-hour class, and I had a 15-minute break. So I rationed my cigarettes so that I had one left to smoke during that 15-minute break. And I could remember the break came, I put on my jacket, and this guy, Alan Thakin, saw me and said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going outside to smoke what may be my last cigarette." And Alan said, "Good for you." Indeed. And I enjoyed every last drag of that cigarette. And when I was done, I was done. Who wants to live forever? I guess I did. And I haven't had another cigarette from that day to this. And there are several things I could attribute to helping me stay off the cigarettes. One is, it's hard to quit. I mean, I don't know how anybody else does it, but I needed an external motivating factor and then a sign to draw a line in the sand, and then I had to go through this whole rationing thing. I mean, I don't want to do that again. But I could. But something else helps me not smoke again, and it has to do with the uniqueness of the day that I quit. It's the reason why I find it awkward to use the word anniversary when talking about quitting smoking, because the date that I quit doesn't come around for me to celebrate every year. It only comes around every 4 years, because the day that I quit is February 29th in the year 2000. So is it my 20th anniversary coming up? Is it my 5th anniversary? Or, by some accounting, is it not even my first? Stay with me. You may know that the reason why we even have a leap day is because it takes just a little bit longer than 365 days for the Earth to revolve around the sun. And if we let all that little bit of extra time go unaccounted for, the seasons are just going to constantly be shifting around the calendar over and over again. And that's okay for the caveman, but we can't have that in civilized society. So, right? So every 4 years, we add a leap day to stabilize the calendar. But what a lot of people don't know is that by adding that leap day, we are overcompensating by just a little bit for what it's designed to fix. So every 100 years, that is every year ending in a 00, they cancel leap day. But even that cancellation overcompensates just a little bit for what it's trying to fix. And so every 400 years, they uncancel the canceled leap day. So February 29th in the year 2000 was the first February 29th in a 00 year in 400 years, and we won't have another one to the year 2400. And I don't care if you smoke or not, none of us are going to be here to see that. So I could never recreate a day like that again. But aren't I just making that up? Isn't that a trick I'm just using to fool myself into not having another cigarette. But here's something I know. After working on True Theater for 9 years, meeting with hundreds of people and hearing hundreds upon hundreds of stories, happy stories, sad stories, I know people love their stories, good or bad. Our stories make up who we are. They're like atoms in our body. Most people wouldn't part with any of their stories for anything. Many stories you can't take away from a person. Ask me sometime about the first time I ran a marathon. I almost didn't make it to the starting line. Funny story, and one that nothing could ever take away from me because it happened. But this story, the story about how I finally quit smoking, if I was to light up another cigarette, this story goes away in a puff of smoke. And as much as I would love to, once again, I know I never will. Because as much as I would love that feeling, I love my story more.